We now move to our first keynote reflection. Our speaker is Reverend Father Rodel E, OP, a distinguished Filipino Dominican theologian. Father Aligan completed his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at the Dominican House of Studies in 1978, and later continued his theological formation at the University of Santo Tomas, where he obtained his licentiate in Sacred Theology and his Master of Arts in Higher Religious Studies in 1993, as well as his doctorate in Sacred Theology in 1998. Building on this solid academic and ecclesiastical formation, he has since taken on significant roles in the church and the university, among them, Professor of Moral Theology at the UST Faculty of Theology, former Dean of the same faculty from 2008 to 2014, and from 2016 to 2023, Ecclesiastical Advisor of the Catholic Physicians Guild of the Philippines, and currently the Conventual Prior of the Priory of St. Thomas Aquinas of the Dominican Province of the Philippines. His scholarly contribution is equally remarkable, having published numerous articles on ethics, Filipino values, and the moral life, including the following: priestly formation in the Asian context, God and the concept of death and suffering in the Philippine context, the ethics of Filipino values and Catholic moral education, and Christian ethical values, among others. Brothers and sisters, it is my honor to welcome Reverend Father Rodel E of the Order of Preachers.
So good morning. We acknowledge the presence of Professor Wadi, the Dean of the Islamic Studies in the UP, and of course, Dr. Lilian Sison, and Professor Joel Sagot. I am tasked to present to you the topic, Reclaiming the Common Good, a Catholic Call for Self-Governance. So all over the world, especially in Asia, even including our beloved country, we are witnessing governments that seem no longer to prioritize the well-being of the people. The cuts to essential services like education, healthcare, infrastructure, housing, logistics, and social safety nets are leaving countless individuals vulnerable. And the policies do not reflect the will of a compassionate society. They reflect the will and power and profit at the expense of the common good. Appeals to the common good have surfaced in discussions of business responsibilities, discussions of environmental pollution, discussion of our lack of investment in education, and discussion on the problems of crime and poverty. And we all agree that most social problems grow out of widespread pursuit of individual interests rather than the common good. So what is the common good? The common good is a notion that originated over 2,000 years ago in the writings of Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero. More recently, the ethicist John Rawls defined the common good as a certain general conditions that are equally to everyone's advantage. The Catholic religious tradition, which has a long history of struggling to define and to promote the common good, defines it as the sum of all conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready to access their own fulfillment. The common good then consists primarily of having social systems, institutions, and environments on which we all depend work in a manner that benefits all people. Examples of particular common goods or parts of the common good would include an accessible and affordable healthcare system, an effective system of public safety and security, peace among nations of the world, a just and legal political system, an unpolluted natural environment, and a flourishing economic system. Because such systems, institutions, and environments have such powerful impact on the well-being of the members of society, it is no surprise that virtually every social problem in one way or another is linked on how well the systems and institutions are functioning. You know, the common good does not just happen. Reestablishing and maintaining the common good require the cooperative efforts of some, often many people. So keeping a community free from the flooding does not simply depend on flood control, canals, and dikes. It also involves recycling wastes and garbage by the community. And most of all, it is being vigilant in the use of the taxpayers' money for such infrastructure and undertakings. It is understandable to feel helpless in the face of such systemic injustice against the common good. That helplessness, however, is what those in power count on. They want us to feel overwhelmed, to believe that our voices do not matter, that resistance is futile. Breaking us down is their own call for our own submission. But lessons of the past tell us that when people come together with a shared purpose, they can bring about extraordinary change. The first step is calling out what is happening. We must refuse to normalize incompetence and corruption. We must call out policies that prioritize the wealthy while stripping essential services from those in need, because silence allows injustice to grow unchecked. Our voices, whether through conversation, social media, letters to the editor, or public demonstration, should try to tell others the truth. You know, one of the most effective tools of oppressive government is isolation, convincing people they are alone in their struggles. The reality is that millions of people are feeling the same outrage, fear, and frustrations that you are. It's so easy to think that only grand gestures matter, like marches of millions, landmark legislations, massive shifts in leadership, paradigm shifts in political strategies. But the smallest act of defiance, beginning from ourselves, can create momentum. Refuse to be complicit. Every moment for justice started with ordinary people, and their community matters. We know also that every oppressive government believes it is invincible. Every corrupt leader assumes they are untouchable. But history teaches us otherwise. Tyranny has always been brought down by people who refuse to accept it. And history is a witness to it all. Only because people dared to demand change. It takes courage to stand up. It takes courage to speak out. But courage is contagious. When one person takes a stand, others begin to believe they can too. And the world has never been changed by those who waited simply for permission. The path of inaction leads only to deeper sufferings and greater inequality. The path of actions, though difficult, leads towards justice, dignity, and hope. So now more than ever is the need for this ethical governance in society. So we ask the question, what then is the role of the church in Catholic ethical governance? Can the church rise up to this challenge? But you know, the real and practical question is, does our Catholic faith, despite a long borrowed tradition of Christian ethics, make a significant difference to good governance? Would then there be a practical, working, Catholic ethical governance? In theory, with its rich ethical tradition, like biblical ethics, conscience, responsibility, and not to mention the sophisticated and evolving subdiscipline of Catholic social teaching, Christianity should be at the forefront if contributing to good governance. But on closer examination, this does not seem to be the case. Transparency International's 2021 report notes that the 10 least corrupt countries on earth are the following: Denmark, Finland, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Germany. In the bottom are countries listed as most corrupt: Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, North Korea, Afghanistan, South Sudan, to mention a few. What is significant about success stories is that except for Singapore, all the states are functioning social democracy. I'll repeat, functioning social democracy, featuring regular election, changes in government, full public health care, education, and welfare service. They are also among the most non-practicing religious countries. While all but Singapore is culturally Christian, some even having state churches, religious practice is low, and levels of such self-declared atheism are high. But even those who consider themselves religious are not very observant or indeed noticeably adhere to church moral teaching in their private lives. Yet, they seem to be the most honest and less corrupt secular societies in the world. So why is there an apparent contradiction with countries inhabited by Christians and Catholics? If I were a Marxist, a Marxist reading of the data would suggest that this would prove the dictum that religion is the opium in the sense of a painkiller of the masses. Keep them pious, keep them stupid, poor and sick, with a God who promises them heavenly reward if they do as they are told in this life. Keep them beholden to their patrons and their dole-outs. When we look at example religious preoccupations in many poor countries, at least until the emergence of liberation theology, the church's mission tended to be sacramental and charity instead of justice-focused. Leadership did not challenge the political status quo, unsurprisingly, since many of the church leadership also would come from the elites. Ethical questions often tended to be focused on sexual matters, opposition to birth control and abortion, gender equality, and even the promotion of the right attitudes towards the elderly, rather than the problems of society. At a deeper level, the problem seems to be rooted in church governance also, to varying degrees hierarchical, rather than as the people of God as proposed in Lumen Gentium, thus legitimizing the notion of divine right of kings and patronage. Even the Enlightenment's concern for liberty, equality, and fraternity were not carried over by the Church to its colonies in the Western world. The Second Vatican Council made the Church open to modernity and new ways of being church. Since then, the Church is seen as swaying back and forth between embracing participatory reforms and subsidiarity, and again, reverting to top-down centralism. So the problem then is not Catholicity per se, but how it mirrors or may mirror authoritarianism. In addition, deference to authority rather than forming conscience and taking responsibility. So how then should Catholic ethical governance hold sway in our own society? So first, our ethical analysis of society should be mirrored in our analysis of church structure and governance. We need to boldly support reform initiatives of the church, particularly those like the Synod on Synodality. In doing this, we need a deeper insight into the historically conditioned nature of many current structure, practices on how the church proceeds. And we should not always be reactive, but rather proactive. Then, second, our task should approach our theological analysis and moral proposals from a transdisciplinary perspective, embracing best available knowledge in science, politics, social theory, and our distinctive traits and culture. In particular, how do Filipino values affect our own response to corrupt and abusive public servants? We should have in mind the teaching of Laudato Si or Fratelli Tutti. For example, how can land use legislation save people from catastrophe and disasters? How can ecological studies and movements save and mitigate our dwindling ecosystem? On a practical level, how many of us even are aware of Project Noah in terms of storms and floods that can save us? Then thirdly, this exercise must take us from our classrooms, seminaries, and churches into the public square. Justice is a non-optional and non-negotiable part of the Christian faith. Partnering exposure with our depressed communities can help open our eyes to the realities we are in. Our Catholic social teaching insists that concern for the common good must include special attention to those whose rights had been denied and diminished. The path to justice includes lifting up the marginalized and recognizing those whom society has historically overlooked. When the Church affirms the dignity of every person, it also insists that justice requires more than formal equality. It requires effort to include those who have been excluded, to make room at the table for those whose voices have not been heard. In a culture wherein we are simply made aware of our rights, but do nothing in concrete, we are called in a better way. The measure of justice is not how many demands we can assert, but how deeply we honor our obligations to one another and society. Reclaiming the common good through justice is not the enemy of our individual dignity, but it is the soil in which that dignity can grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Aligan, for the insightful talk on ethical governance and the common good. Your reflections remind us, Christians and Muslims alike, that true governance is a moral duty rooted in justice, responsibility, and our shared desire to serve the welfare of all.